Revelation chapter 18. Finally, today will, for the most part, will be done with Babylon. Most of you will be glad we're done with Babylon after all that we've learned about her. So, what is the real issue here? Well, let's just cut to the chase. I think that's what chapter 18 does. It cuts right to the chase. Psalm 2 through 4 kind of tells us a little bit about Babylon and why this is happening. I forgot to dismiss the children. You're free to go. You're leaving already. Now, those are children in their first childhood, not in their second childhood, so the smaller ones. But Psalm 2, verse 2 through 4 tells us that the kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against his anointed. And they're saying, let us tear their bonds apart and cast away their cords from us. But he who sits in heaven laughs. The Lord scorns and scoffs at them. So what's really taking place? Well, the sad fact is that throughout human history, proud, arrogant, God-rejected men and women have built their petty kingdoms and their empires in an attempt to control their own life and dethrone God. The problem is no one has ever been able to dethrone God as of yet. Of course, you and I know they never will. But men keep trying to build bigger and better kingdoms that they might control their own destiny in hope that someday somebody might actually overthrow God. That's what's taking place. And one thing about it, payday always comes. And today, in chapter 18, payday comes for Babylon. People ask, is this the same Babylon that we looked at in chapter 17? Well, scholars differ somewhat on it. Some point to two manifestations of Babylon, one religious and one physical. Some see it as both being one, but being judged at the same time. But there are definite similarities between chapter 18 and chapter 17. For example, both are ruled by the Antichrist. Both have ruling queens. Both are filled with blasphemy. Both hate the saints and shed the saints' blood. Both are attached and affiliated with kings that commit fornication with them. And both are under judgment and destroyed. However, there are some significant differences between chapter 17 and chapter 18. First off, in chapter 17, Babylon's called a mystery. Her symbol is a harlot woman identified with the city of Rome, which is inland. A woman, the mother of all harlots. She's guilty of religious abominations and atrocities. And she's destroyed by a political power that previously supported her, which we know is the Antichrist. But now chapter 18, physical or commercial, if you will, Babylon, the symbol's a great city. And she's identified with a port city as being sitting on a port. The habitation of the city has a great marketplace, and she's guilty of greed and self-indulgence. And she's destroyed by one sudden act of God. So I think it's best if we see these as two entities as intertwined together. They're distinct from each other, yet they are together. Religious Babylon of Revelation 17 is judged at the midpoint, or at least it appears to be, of the 7-year tribulation period. But physical Babylon is not judged until the very end. So the breadth of this prophecy shouldn't surprise us. For example, in Old Testament, we see this kind of verbiage being used. When Micah is talking about the coming of the Messiah, he says he will come to Bethlehem. Hosea, in his talking about coming of the Messiah, he says, or in Hosea 11, he says he will come out of Egypt. Malachi says he will come to the temple in Malachi 3:1. But Zechariah says that he will come to Zion. Isaiah answers all of these and talks about all of these different ones and shows us that each and every one of these are true. They're just different authors' perspective about the same event. So we see these things when they're talking about Babylon and mystical Babylon. They are the same, yet they are distinctly different in some ways. Some are at the beginning of the tribulation, the middle, and some at the end. So this passage has a lot to do with Old Testament style of prophecies of doom regarding the wicked cities. We see in Isaiah chapter 13 and chapter 21, he gives us two examples of Babylon. And then in Ezekiel chapter 26 through 28, he talks about the city of Tyre. So is Babylon 18 literal or symbolic? We'll look at that as we go through. But some have thought that what will happen is that Babylon, the city, will be rebuilt, and we know that King Hussein Saddam Hussein, he wanted to rebuild Babylon. In fact, he started rebuilding the Hanging Gardens and got to a certain degree, got finished with some of the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. But he was never able to rebuild it. And as of today, no one ever has been able to rebuild Babylon. Is it possible that if time should stand longer, that Babylon could be rebuilt and it could be the physical city that's being talked about here? It could be, but it's not likely. And the reason being is everything here seems to be symbolic, because really what it's talking about is talking about the world's ideas. And where did they come from? All the heinousness and all the world ideas that are anti-God came from Babylon. And so it's talking about Babylon as a system, if you will. Beginning in verse 1 through 3, we're going to read all 24 verses. We're going to read as we think about these things. But I want us to think about judgment declared in verses 1 through 3, because judgment here is declared on Babylon. It says, "And after these things I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory." Notice that. Something used different here. "And the earth was illuminated with his glory. And he cried out with a loud, mighty voice, saying, Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And she became the dwelling place of demons and every prison of unclean spirit, and the prison of every unclean and hateful bird. For all nations have drunk the wine of her passion, of her immorality. And the kings of the earth have committed acts of morality or immorality with her. And the merchants of this earth have become rich off the wealth of her sensuality." Notice here it says, illuminated with his glory. I find this interesting because you don't see this used most of the time. What is this saying? Remember the Shekinah glory of God? Do you remember when people realized Moses had been in the presence of God? They could tell. And so what we have here is an angel that evidently just came straight out of the throne room, who'd been in the Shekinah glory in the presence of God, comes straight now to here to John to tell him about this, and he's illuminating the earth as he's coming down from heaven. And so some people will say, well, isn't that Jesus? No, and the way that we know that is, notice here it says, "and another angel." That's the same exact word that's used in other places, alon. It means the same exact of the same kind. In other words, it's an angel. Just like all the other angels that was mentioned in chapter 17 and 16 and 15. This is another one just like that one. It's not deity. It is an angel. It's a created being. But he's been in the presence of God and has the Shekinah glory of God. So as he comes down, he's lighting up, if you will, illuminating the earth. And so notice what it says here about Babylon. It says she's become the dwelling place of demons. Now that's a sad fate for a once great city. A city that could have been a great shining light for all of humanity, for all of history, has now become a place of demons. It's a prophetic picture of the absolute desolation where the proud achievements of man have become demonic playgrounds for unclean spirits and these creatures. Notice as these hateful birds, it refers to the demons that are flying around the doomed city. It says she had an abundance of luxury. Babylon's sin was not only idolatry, that's referred to in the term of fornication, but she was guilty of pride, greed, arrogance, selfish stinginess with her wealth. The word sensuality here actually refers to her rejection of any semblance of self-control. Babylon could not control herself. She wanted wealth, she wanted power, she wanted fame, she wanted fortune, and she had no self-control, no self-restraint whatsoever. If she wanted it, she went out and got it. Think about our world today. What is our world teaching? I can remember, even when, and I realize y'all think we were carving on stones. Some of you are young enough to think we were carving on stones when I went back to school. But I can remember being in 7th grade, and I can remember a teacher saying, you need to work hard and you need to work smart, and you'll become rich and you'll be happy. I remember that. I can remember sitting in Skyland Elementary School. I remember the seat I was sitting in when that teacher said that. Right after they had already kicked God out of school. We couldn't pray to God anymore. We could take a few moments of silence and bow our heads, but you couldn't pray out loud to God anymore. So you could do the Pledge of Allegiance still, but that was about it. But that teacher, she said, you work hard, you work smart, you'll get rich, and you'll be happy. That's what the world is teaching. That's what Babylon taught. It's all about what you have. There was no self-control, no self-restraint. Babylon would do anything to attain what she wanted. And when I look at the world today, that's what the world is doing. Verses 4 and 5, the exhortation to flee. God always gives them that opportunity. Look at verse 4. "And I heard another voice of heaven saying, Come out of her, my people, so that you will not participate in her sins and receive from her plagues. For her sins have piled up as high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities. No, he says, come out of her, my people. Well, I'm convinced that God's people shouldn't have been there. I think about Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot had no business being in Sodom. There were no people like him there. And so we find that God sent the angels to get him out. And God here has given his people a chance to get out of Sodom or get out of Babylon before he condemns them, before it comes. Because he says, if you don't, you'll receive part of their plagues. The commercial Babylon was a materialistic lure. Why? Because you could stay there, you could do all these things, you could get richer and richer and richer. And we'll see that at the end of this chapter. He says, lest you receive her plagues. The warning is focused on the saints because they're in a position they shouldn't have been in. Think about in Genesis 19 when Lot was in Sodom. He shouldn't have been there. He had no business being there. Remember, he even offered his daughters to the men if they would just leave the angels alone and not bother them. He should have never been put in that kind of a situation. He says, come out of her. I asked myself the question this morning, is God telling us to get out of Babylon? Have we bought into the whole idea of Babylon where the most important thing is that I get what I want? If I want money, I get more money. If I want power, I get power. If I want fame, I get fame. It's what I want. That's what's important in the whole idea of Babylon. This is what the world seems to have imbibed, and then it is going hard long after. Is what they want. Doesn't matter what the costs are. Is God asking her to get out before the plagues come? I hope all of us realize there's a day coming where God will judge America. If he's not already doing it, there's a day coming where he will judge us. And is he telling us, get out? Moving to Chiang Mai is looking better every day. Although there's ungodliness there too. Here's the thing, there's nowhere in the world you can't go. The Babylonian idea, the world system, the Babylonian system, there's nowhere you can go that is a haven of godliness. Because the whole world now, and that's why he's going to destroy it. He's going to tell us here in a few minutes, the reason I'm going to destroy you is look what you've done to the world. This is a world system now that was created because of you, and now I'm going to destroy you because of that. He says, but you have time to get out before the plagues hit. Isaiah 52:11 says, depart, depart, go out from her. Do not touch any unclean thing. Go out from her and be clean, because you are vessels of the Lord. Jeremiah in chapter 50, verse 8, he says, flee from the midst of Babylon, and everyone save your own life. Jeremiah 51:45 says, my people go out of the midst of her, and let everyone deliver himself from the fierce anger of the Lord. It shows that they were there when they shouldn't have been there. Her sins had reached heaven. The commercial sins were just as bad as the religious sins that we saw in chapter 17. She had become materialistic. That was her destiny. That's what she wanted. And that's what the world has imbibed. Verses 6 through 8, Babylon's judgment is defined. I like this part here. It shows God is just. Not only is he holy and righteous and forgiving, but he is just. He always repays what he owes. Babylon's judgment here in verse 6, pay her back even as she has paid, and give her back a double according to her deeds. In the cup which she has mix twice as much for her, to the degree that she glorified herself and lived sensuously, to the same degree give her torment and mourning. For she says in her heart, I sit as a queen. I am not a widow. I will never see mourning. For this reason, in one day, and that word one day literally means in an hour. In just 1 hour, her plagues will come, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned up with fire. Why? For the Lord God who judges her is strong. And that word there means mighty, almighty. Notice he says pay her back. The word there, pay, or to receive payment, to render, is a term that means literally pay for a debt. She has done something and she is owed. God has said, if you live like this, there's a debt there. God says, I'm going to repay the debt. You have worked for this. You have wanted this. You have earned it. God says, I'm now going to judge you. And so he's going to give her a double portion because that's what she deserves. That's what she has earned. God follows his laws. He always repays double for her works. Why? Because double restitution was required in the Old Testament for theft. When we look at Exodus, if you were a thief, you had to pay back double. And that's what he's accusing Babylon of. You have stole something. And so therefore, as we look at this, you've been a thief. You've done everything you can. You've robbed people. You've done everything you can to gain ill-gotten gains, and now I'm going to pay you back. I'm going to pay you back double, because that's what was a requirement in the Old Testament. Repay her double. The passage here has threefold sin that it unveils. First, the self-indulgence. She lived luxuriously. Now, here's the point. There's nothing wrong with having money. Money is not the root of all evil. It's the lust of money that is the root of all evil. Living a luxurious lifestyle is not evil. There's nothing wrong with people who have money having nice things. There's nothing wrong with people who God has blessed, who has money to live a lavish lifestyle. If they haven't gotten it through what he calls sensuality here, in other words, if you hadn't got it in a dishonest way. Well, you know what the world says today. How many of y'all actually trust the commercials you see on TV? There was a time when there was an advertisement. He said, hey, this is great. I could go. I can save the money. There's always a catch now. There's a hook somewhere in there. You know it, and I know it. Why? Because they're trying to get our money any way they can. Truth is irrelevant anymore. And so here, they live luxuries. But they did it because they were dishonest dealing. Second is pride. She glorified herself. She saw herself as the queen. She's exalting herself actually above God. And third is her avoidance of suffering. She actually thinks, I will never have to mourn. I won't face any suffering. I'm the queen. And so here we find that she was self-indulgent. We find that she was achieving everything that she wanted to achieve. She thought she could avoid suffering. And this is a characteristic of worldliness and materialism today. I can work hard and get what I want, and I'll be happy. And it doesn't matter what I have to do it. Therefore, her plagues will come in one day, literally 1 hour. Sudden destruction will come to Babylon. But then the lament starts. Now, I want you to notice these laments. It starts out with the kings. Look in verses 9 and 10. Notice who is sad and why they're sad that Babylon has fallen. And the kings of the earth, who committed the acts of immorality and lived sensuous with her, will weep and lament over her when they see the smoke of her burning. Standing at a distance, because of the fear of her torment, saying, woe, woe, the great city Babylon, the strong city, for in 1 hour your judgment has come. I find it interesting that standing at a distance, they're lamenting for themselves. Did you notice that? They're sad because now all of a sudden, wait a minute, my source of income's been cut off. I mean, things were great. I mean, I was getting to go and be a part of all this, but now you're burning and all of a sudden you've affected me. They're not really sad that Babylon is gone. They're sad because now their access to Babylon is gone, and they're lamenting over it. Look at verse 11 through 17, the lament of the merchants, and pay close attention to these. And notice this, these are not things you need. These are things that are luxury. These are things that you can have, nothing necessarily that you need. And the merchants of the earth weep and they mourn over her because no one buys cargo anymore. The cargo of gold and silver and precious stones and pearls and fine linen and purple and silk and scarlet and every kind of citron wood and every article of ivory and every article made from a costly wood and bronze and iron and marble and cinnamon and spice and incense and perfume and frankincense and wine and olive oil and fine flour and wheat and cattle and sheep and cargoes of horses and chariots and slaves and human lives. Don't forget that, slaves and human lives. The fruit you long for has gone from you, and all the things that were luxurious and splendid have passed away from you. And men, you will find them no longer. And the merchants of these things who became rich from her will stand at the distance because of the fear of her torment, and there'll be weeping and mourning, and they will be saying, woe, woe, the great city. She was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls. For in 1 hour such a great wealth has been laid waste. Notice the merchandise, gold and silver, and all these different things. These are not things that are necessities of life. These are things that you get because you want more out of life. You combine this picture with the kings and the merchants, and what you find here is you find the total devastation of the economic system. In other words, it's a total collapse. And everyone, all the wealth they had gained is going to go away from them. They'll never be able to earn any more. Notice that this also says the bodies and the souls of men. In 1998, I went to Phnom Penh, Cambodia. And from the IMB missionary's house to a church we were working at called Russet Gal Baptist Church, we had to go by this dirt road. Now, the dirt road was 4 lanes wide, huge dirt road. It was a major highway going in and out of Phnom Penh, but it was dirt. And there were little shanties all along it, and there were shanties going down the hillside, probably 400 or 500 shanties. You have all these girls, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, and they're out there trying to sell their bodies anywhere from $2 to $5 is basically, and they were required to do 10 to 20 people a day where they got beat. I met this girl. She was 14 and a half years old. Our missionary that lived there had gotten her out of this environment. When she was 12, her daddy sold her for the equivalent of about 19 to 20 US dollars. Sold her into prostitution to this pimp. The first 6 months, she said, I knew it was wrong. Never read a Bible before. Didn't have God to tell her it was wrong. She just knew it. She said, I knew it was wrong to sell my body, so for 6 months, I refused every day, and I got beat every day. And she said, after 6 months, he almost killed me, and I thought anything's better than dying. So for 2 years, from 12 and a half to 14 and a half, she did as he asked. And they called it service. So she was servicing people, 10, 15, 20, 25 people a day for $2 to $5, whatever she could get. And I looked into this eyes of this 14-and-a-half-year-old girl, realizing that she wasn't HIV positive, she had full-blown AIDS. And living in Phnom Penh, it was a death sentence. There's no way she'd ever have the money to get any kind of treatment. And I'm looking at a 14-and-a-half-year-old dead girl. And worse than that, I'm looking to the eyes, and you could look deep in those eyes, and all the innocence was gone. That's the kind of place Babylon was. She will do anything to get her wealth, just like her daddy wanted his money for her. The pimp wants his money for her. He'll do anything. And if she gets sick and dies, it's not that big a deal. There's another 12-year-old out there somewhere. That's the attitude of Babylon. I don't understand how a father could ever do that. It's just beyond my comprehension. But I do realize we live in a wicked, wicked world. And some people will do anything for money. Babylon profited because they sold the bodies and the souls of men. And we're talking about the souls of men, you can't, you're still in control of your soul, whether you become a Christian or whether you don't. That's up to you. Put your faith and trust in Christ. But when it says that souls are sold, it means to just take everything that's out of them. And that's what I saw in that girl. There's nothing left in her. After 2 years, there was nothing left in her. It's almost as though they had stole her soul. God forbid that ever happen again. But, it's easy for us to point fingers at Cambodia. But do you realize there are a lot of businessmen that fly into Atlanta, Georgia? They intentionally have 6, 8, 10-hour layovers so that they can get a limo to Fulton Industrial Boulevard, to a couple of hotels where there are prostitutes from all over the world who've been kidnapped and brought in there. We're talking about American businessmen are doing this. And then they go back to the airport and they fly off to their next destination. And the reason I know that is when I was at Truett, we had some girls at Truett who they had a burden for the prostitutes who were forced to work down there, and they went down there trying to get them out of that lifestyle. Thank God for those young ladies who had a passion and a heart to try to get those out. But I can't really point fingers at one country when ours is just as bad, if not worse. What have we done for wealth? He says here, you'll find them no more. Those who live with all the luxuries that Babylon had to offer, the luxuries will be gone. In fact, I'm convinced that one of the horrible parts of hell is the fact that you're going to be there. If you're not a believer, if you don't put your faith and trust in Jesus, when you die and you go to hell, part of that torment is knowing you could have had that. And all the desires that you have, they'll be unfulfilled. There'll be no way to fulfill them anymore. And part of it would be knowing I could be in heaven now with Christ. But not only that, I'm stuck here, and the things I want and the things I crave. And by the way, the things you crave here will be the same thing you crave there. which tells me something. If you crave after holiness and righteousness in heaven, what will you find? Holiness and righteousness. If you crave all the things that Babylon craved, when you get to hell, you will crave those things. But there'll be no fulfillment. Verses 17 through 19, even the lament of the sea captains. And every shipmaster and every passenger and every sailor and as many as make their living by the sea stood at a distance. And they were crying as they stood there and they saw the smoke burning. And they were saying, what a city is like this great city. And they threw dust in their heads and they were crying out and weeping and mourning. And they're saying, woe, woe, this great city. In this, all the ships who had come to become rich because of her wealth, for in 1 hour she was laid waste. That great city, which all the ships were coming into, again, there's not really much need to comment. What it boils down to is they knew they were getting their wealth at the expense of others. But then verse 20 is the end of the lament. There's a call to heaven and the people of heaven to rejoice. This may seem a little bit odd to us. Rejoice over her, O heaven. Rejoice, you saints and apostles and prophets, because God has pronounced judgment for you against her. When he says rejoice over her, he is not saying rejoice over the destruction. Don't rejoice over the fact that thousands and hundreds of thousands of people are dying and being destroyed. But rejoice on the fact that God has finally kept his promise. I will repay you. And so now that day has come. God has repaid. And so we can rejoice in the fact that God has kept his promise. And there's a resolution that comes when God keeps his promise. The judgment that has been brought to them is the resolution of God's righteousness. And in the finale, in verses 21 through 24, 21 really is the death knell, so to speak. It says, then a strong angel took up a stone like the millstone and threw it into the sea, saying, so will Babylon, that great city, be thrown down with violence, never to be found any longer. And I think that's one reason that we won't ever see Babylon rebuilt in a physical sense, because it says never to be found ever again, or never any longer. So we see this mighty angel. It's similar to what Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 36 when he says, take my word and bind a millstone around it and throw it into the sea. Same kind of idea. It's the same idea that Jesus says, for those of you who, if you cause one of those innocent, one of the little ones who believes in me, you cause them to sin, God said, you'd be better to have a millstone tied around your neck and thrown into the sea. You should never, ever cause we shouldn't cause anybody to sin, but any of those who believe, he says, we should not do those things. Why? Well, because that's what Babylon has done and continues to do and will do until the end of time. That great city Babylon will be thrown down and never to be found again. In verse 22 and 23, notice how desolate and how powerless she is. And the sound of the harpists and the musicians and the flute players and the trumpets will never be heard any longer. No craftsman with any craft will be found any longer. And the sound of the mill will not be heard any longer. And the light of the lamp will no longer shine. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride, they'll not be heard any longer. For your merchants were great men of the earth, because of all the nations received by your sorcery. Now we need to look at that word sorcery. It's actually the word pharmakia, which we get our word pharmacist. It literally means to prepare drugs. It means to mix. You remember, sometimes you'll see at a pharmacy, you'll see like the mixing bowl and the little auger that they mix with, and they're blending these different chemicals together to produce something. And that's what he's saying here. What you have done is you have taken what you want to do and you have mixed it together. You have taken all the sins and you've used it, and you have deceived the world by your sorcery, by your mixing lies together. This is what you've done. You've affected the whole world, Babylon, and because of that, that's why you were laid desolate. In this graphic and poetic language, it describes the industry and the commerce that's coming to an end. It says, for by your sorcery all the nations were deceived. Verse 24, the ultimate reason for commercial Babylon's judgment. Because in her was found the blood of the prophets and of the saints and all those who had been slain on earth. The extent of this charge is the indication that the great city, the symbolic, will come to an end. It's the world system. Jesus refers to the world system quite often. And when he does, he's talking about the entire world system. And that's what Babylon has infected. She got into the world system, and every corner of the globe that you can go to, you see greedy men and women doing whatever they can do to please themselves, thinking, I don't have to pay for this. And if they have to abuse somebody, they'll do it. They don't mind. In her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints. God takes the persecution of his people very, very personal. In fact, God says, if you attack my people, you attack me. And I will repay. And that's what he's done. I think there's three things we can take home from this. This is something that's going to happen in the future, but I think there's three things we really need to think about today. One, he says, lest you receive her plagues. Are we sitting in the same place Lot was sitting in Genesis 19? Are we living in Babylon that's all around us, and are we imbibing their ideas, or are we saying, well, you know, my neighbors are doing this and it works well for them. I mean, I've got some guys at work and they're doing this and it's okay, you know. Or are we living our life by God's standard and what God says is right and holy and just? Or are we living our lives by the world standard? And that's what it boils down to. Babylon represents 21st century global world standards. And that world standards, when you look at it, it says you can cheat, you can do whatever you want to do. You can fill your life with all kind of evilness and get by, and there's no repercussions from it. Are we living in a place where we shouldn't be living? He says, if we are, he says, come out of her. Why? Because there's a day coming when judgment comes. Second thing I think we can take home with us and ask ourselves is, have we become Babylon's commercial selfishness? Have we become rich by exploiting others? Have I done one thing even, in any shape, form, or fashion, to gain something for myself at your expense? If I have, that's what Babylon says is okay. I mean, after all, you know, you got more than I do anyway, so I take what you have. You do realize that's some of the, if you watch some of the cop shows and these people that get caught stealing, yeah, but I mean, you know, they had a whole lot more than I did. So I'm just trying to make things equal. I mean, I've got nothing and they got everything. It doesn't matter. Are we becoming rich by exploiting others? I think we have to answer that question. And third, have we violated Matthew 18:6? But whosoever causes one of the little ones who believe in me to sin, it would be better for them if a millstone were hung around their neck and they were drowned in the depth of the sea. I would hope that none of us in here I hope all of us answer no to all those. Hopefully we're not living in Babylon. We don't want what Babylon has to offer. We only want what Jesus has to offer. After all, everything Babylon has to offer is flawed and coming to an end. Everything that Jesus offers lasts forever and is perfect. You know the great thing about Jesus? He never has and never will, at your expense, gain anything. In fact, he gave everything so that you might have the opportunity to have eternal life.